Hello everyone. In the previous lesson, we began explaining what cases are. Today, we'll continue where we left off in part number 1 of our Introduction to Grammatical Cases. If you haven't watched that video, I strongly suggest you watch it first, since you might not understand today's lesson if cases are still new to you. Last time, we talked about cases with the help of our man-bull example. We explained how word order plays a bigger role in English than Slovene, and how cases allow us to move words around, making the Slovene word order much more flexible. We even went so far as to picture an imaginary language where different roles or grammatical functions would be marked with different colors. The words would then be free to be moved around since the colors would take on the job of the word order. We said this is similar to how cases work. Continuing where we left off, it is in fact similar to how cases work, but with cases, it's not a different color, but rather a small change in the word itself, such as adding or removing a letter at the end of the word. That's how words are marked for their different roles or functions. These small changes are called inflections. Anyway, when a word becomes marked like that, it becomes free to be moved around to an almost comical degree when compared to English, since its meaning is now linked to the minor change in its appearance, not to its place in relation to other words in a sentence. Let's go a step further today and see how this works by translating our man-bull example to Slovene. The basic form of the word man in Slovene is človek, and the basic form of bull is bik. Notice that the last letter of both basic forms is K, a consonant, making both nouns masculine. Kills is ubije, but we're not interested in the verb. The man kills the bull. Translating this to Slovene, we get človek ubije bika. Remember that the basic form of both man and bull ends in a K. But as you can see in the Slovene translation, the bull, so the one that's getting killed, gets an extra letter to mark its role in the sentence. The A in bika tells us it's the victim or object of the sentence. That's why we're free to move the words around, just like we did when we colored them differently. Moving the words around, we get bika ubije človek. Both sentences are grammatically correct, and both of them for the most part convey the same meaning. In Slovene, many different word orders are grammatically correct, but there are small differences in meaning, or rather, what you want to point out in a sentence, which part of it you want to highlight. But honestly, especially in spoken Slovene where you can use your voice to emphasize what you want to say, there are often two or more word orders that are practically the same. Now, Slovene is a subject-verb-object language, so the first sentence here is more usual than the second, but they're both correct. Okay, now let's translate the other sentence as well. The bull kills the man. This time it's the man or človek that gets the additional A to mark it as the victim or object of the sentence. Being marked, it can be moved to the first position just like in the previous example. Človeka ubije bik is still the bull kills the man in English, although we could use the passive voice as well if we wanted to move the words around to get the bull is killed by the man. Just like in the previous example, the first sentence is the more common one since it follows the subject-verb-object word order. But again, the second sentence is perfectly fine as well. The additional A, either on človek or bik, tells us we're dealing with the object and gives us the basic idea of what's going on. Word order in Slovene is used to highlight certain pieces of information while keeping others in the background, but again with speech we use our voice to convey this as well. Okay, so now you probably feel encouraged and think cases are pretty easy. You put a letter here and there and it all makes sense. Well, at this point I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that by this point we've probably demystified cases and you're beginning to understand what they're about even if you've never heard of them before. Also, if you go step by step just like we did in this lesson, and if you work on them consistently, I'm sure cases won't prove to be nearly as difficult as people think they are. The bad news is that if cases are new to you, and this lesson is the first time you're hearing about them, then by this point my guess is you probably think they're easier to master than they actually are. Cases are pretty challenging, especially if you're coming from a language that lacks a complex case system. I think consistency and patience are the most important qualities when learning them. Work on them consistently and don't be emotionally invested in how fast you progress. Especially since when learning a language in general, you're usually not rewarded in a linear fashion. You either feel like you're making big leaps forward or that you're stagnating or stuck. Okay, now let's have a look at why I said cases are probably more difficult than you think if this is the first time you're hearing about them. I chose the man-bull example on purpose to make the explanation straightforward and easy to understand. What you should know is that the words man and bull are both masculine. Case endings change with gender, and Slovene nouns are either masculine, feminine, or neuter. Note that they're also both in the singular, and the singular endings differ from those of the dual and plural. Besides being masculine nouns in the singular, they share another characteristic, and that is that both of them are animate nouns, which means they describe living beings. With masculine nouns, there is a slight difference with animate versus inanimate in case endings as well. Having all these things in common means that both get the ending a when they're the object. A feminine noun in the same function of a direct object would get a different ending, and like we said, it's the same with number. So now that we've covered the theory, let's see what it means to learn cases in practice. When talking about cases, we pretty much have a table in mind, a table of all the different endings a word can take depending on its function in a sentence. There are 6 cases in Slovene, always listed in the same order from 1 to 6. There are also 3 numbers, the singular, the dual, and the plural. This makes up for 18 different forms of a noun of a particular gender, in this case the masculine, since beak or bull is masculine. So what you see is the set pattern of conjugating masculine animate nouns. There's also another table like this for feminine nouns, and yet another for neuter nouns. Horrible as it may be, let's have a look at the whole thing. Beak or bull is an example of how you decline a masculine noun. But since Slovene has 3 genders, there is of course another table for feminine nouns, and yet another for neuter nouns. Miza or table is feminine, and mesto or city is neuter. Of course, there are also neuter nouns that end in e, but let's not complicate matters more than necessary. So, let's see where the piece of the puzzle that we were dealing with fits into the whole picture. When we added a to beak or človek, we were dealing with the accusative of masculine nouns in the singular. The ending is a, but as you can see the endings differ depending on the gender and number besides the case as well. Now I know this table looks horrible, but you'll never tackle all of this at once. You'll break it down and practice things separately, dealing with each case, number, gender, and so on at a time. Besides, there are a lot of things that can be pointed out to make the table easier to remember and less intimidating. For example, masculine animate nouns and neuter nouns ending in o are almost identical, and masculine inanimate nouns and neuter nouns ending in o are identical. The difference is of course in the accusative. The ending is a for animate nouns, and there is no ending for inanimate nouns. Also, there are a lot of ways to tackle cases that are easier than just trying to commit different endings to memory. More on that in future lessons. That's it for now. Next time we'll have a look at the 6 cases and highlight their main functions. Until then, good luck, study hard, and aim for the stars.